to the Dog Expert Podcast, the podcast dogs would want you to listen to. Powered by canineprinciples.com, helping passionate dog people go from feeling unsure and overwhelmed to confident, compassionate and science savvy through a rich library of online courses and formal qualifications. Each week on the podcast, we dive deep into the real, raw and rewarding world of dogs. This isn't about obedience. This is about understanding. Because dogs aren't problems to solve. They're free-thinking, sentient beings to connect with.
Excellent.
Hello, good evening.
Hi.
Welcome. My name's Jo Middleton, and we have got the wonderful Penny, Dr. Zoolittle, my co-host. Emily can't be with us this evening because the time zones don't marry up, but we are all super excited to be spending this evening with the one and only incredible Caroline Ingraham. Caroline is joining us. Caroline is joining us, and we were just talking backstage about some of the stuff that Caroline's been up to today, and I'm going to hand over to Penny to explore this in more detail because it was fascinating. So Penny, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Jo, and welcome, Caroline.
Well, thank you for having me back on.
We're so treated to have you for a second time, so thank you for joining us. But let's just start immediately with what Jo was intimating there, because you were telling us backstage this incredible double-ended story, or two stories that kind of dovetail in a totally different vibe from each other. And before we talk about some of the other stuff that we've had planned for this, let's look at that, because I think it sets the scene for the power of animal self-selection, but also the need for it to be done in an educated way, not just willy-nilly throwing things into the animal's atmosphere. So can you tell us those stories again?
Oh, I just literally got off a Zoom session at a vet surgery. So they had called me in to help with a cat that is, he's been on painkillers for a long time, and they're beginning to really not work. And he's on injection medication, tablets, and what happens is he starts pulling the hair out around his tail area, and his tail had been amputated, and it's just driving him to distraction. And they didn't know if they're going to have to euthanize because the painkillers are just becoming less and less effective over time. So I offered St. John's wort, which is typically for chronic pain. There was some interest. And then I offered yarrow, and it just took in so much yarrow, just breathing in the vapors, and and purring and over doing the vomonasal organs, so his lip came up so he could take in as much as possible. And the owners were just blown away by his reaction. And then the next thing he selected is birch, which is a natural it's a natural painkiller that's got methyl salicylate constituents in, so it's very similar to non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, but it really works in harmony with the body, so it doesn't block the prostaglandins to the gut in the way chemical non-steroidals do. Anyway, it worked a lot. His little eyes squinting, again, taking in more of this birch aroma, and then he began purring really deeply. And then he curled up in a little ball and went to sleep in the vet surgery. So they just couldn't thank me enough. And she had been really skeptical. So this was a long time coming. Sophie had mentioned this cat to me a couple of months ago and said, she's a little bit skeptical. And she was, just so happy with what she saw. And then in the next breath, which is what Penny's talking about, Sophie said, we've had, such a busy day today with emergencies. And she said, she then went on to a cat, because I had said, be careful to the carers of the cat, not to let any essential oils touch the nose. And then Sophie said, we had a cat came in today where his whole underbelly was covered in a mixture of essential oils. I mean, how do you get that amount of essential oil on the underbelly of a cat? You know, they come in 5 ml bottles. They've got a dropper on. And she said it was cheap and nasty. So whether it was some, you know, fragrance that you put in a diffuser, that was really cheap synthetic essential oils. But anyway, so the cat went to lick his belly, and the cat's in a really bad way. So the cat came down with seizures. You know, he's completely burnt all of his undercarriage. He's in emergency care at the moment, and he's he's struggling for his life. So I said to Sophie, as an extra tool, if he begins to come around, because she's concerned he might continue to lick his fur, even though they use detergent to try and get as much off as possible. She said that that if he came around, she's concerned that he's going to lick his fur again. So I said, cover it with green clay, dust it in, and that will work as to neutralize the essential oils and detox, especially if he tries to lick it again. So we'll see how he gets on. Hopefully he'll recover. But it's going to give essential oils a really bad name. So on one hand, we have a cat that's finally out of pain. It saved the cat's life because the cat was going to be euthanized, and now it's found pain relief. To somebody, I just don't know. I said, how did they get that amount of essential oils saturating the cat's belly?
For the people who don't know why that's such a dangerous issue, because of course we're familiar with why we can't use the oils topically for a cat, where we can for a horse, for example, or we can in some levels for a dog. So could you just dive into that for a second to explain to our people who are wondering why this would be such a serious thing?
Oh yeah, because cats, they do have the enzymes to break down the oils, different enzymes to dogs, horses, and humans and other vertebrates. They actually come in the same category as plants and insects, and they have an enzyme called glucosidation, which breaks down essential oils efficiently. So they can break down essential oils. People say they can't because they don't have glucose transferase enzymes, which the other vertebrates have. If they didn't have this enzyme, they wouldn't be able to deal with veterinary medicine. It's like, so they can, but their dose is completely different. These are big carnivores, and so they're not going to have a lot of herbs, plants in their diet. So they're not going to have the enzymatic physiology to be breaking down plants, because it's not that they eat them as a way of life like a horse. And so in addition to that, they stay in the body longer. So for example, methoxyslate stays, I think it's around 9 hours in a dog, depending on how much is taken. I think it was 1 hour in the research in a horse, and it was 36 hours in a cat. So they need a much lesser dose. So it breaks down more slowly. Having said that, their dose is inhalation, perfect for them. So they're getting these tiny little aroma molecules into the blood, and that is absolutely perfect to help them fight cancer, which they have done with essential oils, pain, and they work by inhalation more than they do topically. If they're going to do something topically, they roll on plants, like they roll on valerian or they roll on lavender. So that's how they treat themselves. But essential oil would be too strong, and you wouldn't really be able to guide it, because if you're putting a drop on the skin and going into the blood, you don't really know their dose. So, and it would be terrible, incredibly strong. But they will get, garlic is one of the most popular essential oils, believe it or not, with cats, along with birch. And they do come up really close to it. And sometimes they might spend 20 to 30 minutes just breathing in the garlic or breathing in the birch. And that's fine. As long as they're controlling their dose, a cat doesn't poison itself unless it's on plants that haven't been in the evolutionary history and they can't recognize it. But they've all evolved with essential oils. Cats are smart. And I don't know any cat that would select an essential oil it doesn't need. It doesn't happen. So as long as you're working with them and handing it over to them and letting them guide you, you can't go wrong. And I always say, one man's medicine is another man's poison. So, and it's like all medicine, isn't it? It's like what
Dose
might
dependent.
Yeah, exactly. So what might be needed for one person, you're not going to take somebody else's medicine because it's going to do you harm, but it's going to do that individual that needs the medicine good. And I think that's the thing with essential oils. People seem to put them in one bracket and say, all essential oils, are harmful. And that's not true. They're medicines. They save lives. They alleviate suffering. But you don't give somebody else's medicine.
Right.
And who better to know what they need than the animal?
Animal themselves.
Exactly. And cats typically always just inhale oils. I have had 3 times where cats asked for it topically. And it's only trace amounts, so you'd rub your hands together. And one was lemon. And when they want it topically because they smell it and then they begin to rub on things. And so you rub your hands together. And then you offer your hands, and then he rubbed his kidney area over the fragrant hand. And another time, actually, it was Birch, a cat with really severe arthritis. He wanted it on the arthritic hip. But typically they just inhale essential oils, and you'd never drop an essential oil on a cat. So
this is a perfect illustration, really, of the importance for any of us who want to work with this stuff, who want to respect the animal's wisdom and intelligence, to remember that knowledge in this place creates safety. Because we would never go into a compounding pharmacy, for example, and start making George's Marvelous Medicine. We wouldn't just be pulling things off the shelf and go, oh, a bit of this sounds good. That one looks nice. Purple's great. Yeah. And then go, here, eat that and give it to somebody. We would have an utmost respect for the craft of pharmacology and knowing that it comes with inherent dangers as well as inherent powers. And so we can sometimes fall into the trap of thinking, oh, it's essential oils. I get that in the spa. It's just easy. And therefore, well, we'll just play with that then without having that respect for the art and science of that the animals are born with, that we need to perhaps study a little bit first. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's exactly what you've been putting into your latest book, which is a complete expansion on your previous one, which I still love and is on the shelf behind me. So could you just kind of tell us a little bit more about the new one? And okay, I've got so many questions here. Why did you want to update it? What did you want to add in? And does it in fact equip the reader to have the skill set to work safely?
Okay, yeah. So basically it's a reference guide, this book. And I began to update my old book. And as I began to update it, I began to rewrite the whole thing. And it's very much, I've rewritten it probably about 6 times and reworked it. And it's so this really sort of in 3 sections. So the first section is all about how it works, which you might think, oh, I've got that in the first book, but it goes into more detail, and it's more, I think it's much more user-friendly, more inviting to read. And then there's new sections as well in it. I talk about Born Knowing, which will be a seal that selected plant remedies, even though when he had a respiratory problem again, he was going to be euthanized. They usually get called in when they're going to be euthanized. And I thought, I wonder if he's going to select plant remedies when he's been away from plants for 15, 25 million years. Will that still be in his DNA to remember that? So I offered him things like garlic, carrot seed, but also marine remedies like seaweeds, spirulina, green clay, and oh my gosh, he selected carrot seed and garlic over everything. And I thought, how am I going to treat the seal? So I had buckets of water, and he wasn't going in his little pond that he had, his bath type of pond at all. He was quite poorly. And yet he'd make his way to sit in the bucket with garlic water in. I had another bucket with carrot seed in. I had another bucket with plain water, but he always went in the garlic water, which is renowned for respiratory problems. And he cured himself by doing so. And, so examples like that to really sort of bring home that it is in the DNA of all animals. That because people will say, oh, domestic animals, have they lost it? And if you think the seal has left plants pretty much for all those millions of years, and he could still select perfectly. And I find newborns select perfectly, and domestic animals, captive animals. It's such an important survival mechanism that it's not going to be eradicated in a comparatively short amount of time. A horse isn't going to eat meat if it's hungry. It's the same sort of thing. It's in the DNA for survival, food and medicine. And so an animal's not going to poison themselves, or else they wouldn't have made their evolutionary history. And if they do poison themselves, they're on plants that have been introduced much later into their into their environment, so to speak, with diversity of trade and bringing poisonous plants over to Europe that the wild domestic cat, that the wild cat had never encountered. So, it's got stories like that as well. It talks about the difference between why you can't do clinical trials with self-medication and what we can do instead. And it equates the work to be very similar to Jane Goodall's work, which is observation, and what we can learn from this observation, because we're biological, and we change, our internal states change, and you can't standardize us, which is what the clinical trials do. It's very much, if you come in that middle standardization, you do okay, but if you fall the other side of the standardization, it can be more problematic. And I think the thing is with self-medication, it is very individual. So you cannot do a clinical trial. And so many people say to me, why don't we get trials done? And you can't, because, the horses with a stomach upset, say it's horses or dogs or whatever species it is. And so you're going to offer 5 remedies that typically work on the gut, on perhaps match that condition, and they will select the one that suits them. And then perhaps you're going to select them another typical 5 that are selected to support, an excess of problematic microbiome, like garlic or bitter almond. And they will often, select 1 or 2 oils from each category, but they won't be the same, but they will come from the same category. Does that make sense? So with the gut oils, they'd select different gut oils to match their individuality and dose. So if I was to give, with a clinical trial, it's just, everybody gets the same dose for the same duration of time. And it's just not going to work that way, because some animals just want to inhale a remedy. Another animal might want to lick it. Another animal might want it just for a short amount of time. Another might want it longer, and they will dose themselves differently. And then we get the fantastic results we're seeing, because their body knows exactly. And we change internally. Our internal state changes, all the time. With stress, we might want a little bit more medicine because our immune system has dropped. So So explain that. And I've actually got to do a talk in GRUS with a scientific committee for people and animals, and I've had to hand it all in, and I've been asked for my references that support all of my work, and it's like, no, this isn't we can't do this. I can tell you my observation, as with Jane Goodall, and look how much Jane Goodall learned, because she wasn't programmed in that strict criteria. She could really learn behavior and understand what these chimpanzees were selecting and doing and communicating, because she had that freedom to look at them as individuals. So that was so I've got that in the book, explaining that.
So just on that note there's a really valid point to raise, and that often comes up when we're, as a welfare zoologist, it's a very similar thing. I don't have a case study pool, or a data set, if you like, of 500 individuals.
Yeah.
Welfare is a one-to-one individual thing, so the N equals 1 in your scientific thing, and so it becomes very difficult to meet the requirements, the scientific rigor of a model that wants this kind of statistical analysis. But we have to remember that there are more models or more frameworks within the umbrella category of science than just this one pathway that has been somehow elevated as the gold standard. And when it's done correctly, this is a very powerful tool, but it's not the only tool in the box. And one of the most incredible things why Jane Goodall became as well known and loved as she is because she brought something in that had been neglected, had been excluded. Let's be real, probably from a relatively legalistic and rigid masculine framework, and looked at the animal as a whole individual rather than a compartmentalized and broken down structural thing that was separated. So she stitched the animal together in its entirety, in its ecosystem, and developed a whole new understanding of nature, science, behavior, community, animals, and the whole thing, and blew apart zoology in a way that hadn't been done probably for 500 years. And so we have the access now to follow the path that she forged in that and say, yes, zoopharmacognosy, animal self-medication falls into this bracket too. So does animal welfare. So does functional medicine for animals, because it is tailored to the individual who is dynamic. And as you say, the biology, the internal terrain is going to be changing on an hourly basis, depending on the immune system status, what the animal has eaten, and so forth. And I'm going to stop talking in a second, but I just think it's a really exciting point that you make there that doesn't exclude it from scientific validity. In actual fact, it comes in and says, this is just as powerful. And when we put your rigid system with this one here, we get more than the sum of its parts. So let's have two toolkits under the science umbrella. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, no, thank you. You said that very eloquently and perfectly. So that was great. It's and also, our dosage is going to be different because our metabolism, no two metabolisms are the same. So, it will be different to get the required dose for that, and for that individual, and the severity of the illness will be different too, which will dictate their dose. So it's
the joy of biology is that everything is a variable, everything is dynamic. It's not physics, it is like an equation. So we have to have some flexibility in there.
Yeah, and I think people.
It's like Sarah Fisher said, question everything apart from the dog. The dog's always right.
No, I go for that. It's absolutely, because they know, they know exactly what they need, and especially when you're working with plant medicines. People might be saying, oh but why do they eat food that can be toxic or but there's a reason for it, and which is all in my book. But I could go into it now, but it would be another lecture. But it's usually when plants haven't been in their evolutionary history, and it's usually when there's sugars attached, or it's things that they can't recognize, like antifreeze, or it's a plant that's been brought over from the tropics where the original wolf didn't reside. So, but yeah, I mean, we can see day by day that they're selecting beautifully and they don't poison themselves with these plant medicines, which have no metabolic value. So they're not going to be taking them for food because they provide no energy. They're not foods, and they're very bitter when they're not needed, and they smell unpleasant when they're not needed. So the middle bit of my book is a big materia medica. So it's basically talks all about the remedies, and it talks all about I begin it with talking about how it's used traditionally, that remedy or that essential oil, and then anything you need to know about the essential oil, like if there's red thyme or white thyme, what's the difference, so you understand what you're working with, and if there's any sort of extra science that needs to be known. But typically the science will be in when I break it down. So basically then I just say typically how it's selected in self-selection. So you can see might be a bit of a difference in how it's being used traditionally. And then I go into subheadings, and I talk about, say it's colic, how it works on colic, say peppermint, what it's doing to the gut, how it stimulates the gut, how it relaxes the muscles. And then it's all backed up with references. So there are a lot of references on essential oils and how they work in the body. So I've spent a long time researching, backing up really what the animals have been doing. So we can, well, that totally makes sense that they're selecting peppermint for colic because peppermint is doing X, Y, Z, or yarrow is selected when an animal is wounded, typically for an anti-inflammatory, and then we can find out how it works, and it just inhibits COX-2 opposed to COX-1, the prostaglandins, the inflammatory response at the site of the wound. And peppermint is so fascinating. I have so many little sort of nuggets on peppermint. But it does so many different things, how it works as a natural analgesic, and how it cools its cooling sensation on the skin works as an analgesic. So it's amazing for burns. So, I talk about how everybody thinks of lavender for burns and why they think that, because of John Vernet, but it doesn't have it has repairing qualities. But it doesn't have the cooling properties which you're going to need when you're first burned. And so it just really cools, and that cooling sensation, it works as an anti-inflammatory. So peppermint does so many different things. It's very good for musculoskeletal aches and sprains. It's very good for cooling the skin. It's very good for headaches, especially, with my dog, if she had a hot head, I think, have you got a headache? And I would offer her some peppermint, and she'd always take it when she had a hot head, and she'd just take a few sniffs and then she was done. There was another dog at Battersea Dogs Home who could never lay down, and it was a retriever and was always very anxious, and just as soon as he lay down, he got up again, and he was desperate for peppermint. Desperate. But he wanted it by mouth. It wasn't enough just sniffing it. And typically I would put it on my fingers, rub my fingers together and let them lick it, because they know what they need. I wasn't allowed to, because I wasn't allowed to offer anything by mouth. Accidentally, a drop ended up on the floor, and he licked it off, and he released so much gas, and he lay down for the first time and went to sleep. So that the dose wasn't strong enough. And when you know that, it's like, we can go to the chemist and get an antacid, and it's so unfair that the dog isn't allowed to have its or their antacid, And we know that indigestion is really painful. It hurts. And peppermint every time. Yeah, it's just such a good anti-acid. And so it's a really good all-round oil. But anyway, I've written all about lots of little subtitles, how it works on, as cooling induced analgesia. And then I've got papers, typically from PubMed or Science Direct, to back up my findings, which can be found at the back of the book. And then I go through, and then I do, if something really stands out with a case study that has been typically focused on that oil, I'll write that in with that oil. So I'll give an example. It's for humans as well. I've included humans in there because we're all animals. The human, the oils work the same across board, but we just take them different ways. So a horse will be slightly different from a human, who will be slightly different from a dog and a bear, who will be slightly different from a cat or a large cat, a tiger or lion. So depending on the on the species is how we take the remedies. So I've included humans, and I've included, say, when I'm talking about basil, my experience with basil and how very quickly I gave birth after having basil in my bath. And it only works when you're near the due date, and contractions are meant to have begun, but they haven't, or if you go past the due date. And I put a few drops in my bath, and he's only 3 days late. And it was 20 minutes later, I was rushed off to hospital. He had a very quick birth, but he was very healthy, and they gave him all 10 out of 10 points of a healthiness. It was a little bit painful because it was so quick. And then I thought, okay, for my next, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I thought, I'm not going to interfere. I also thought, I don't want to interfere with his birth date in case he was meant to be born on another date a bit later on. But anyway, so I'm not going to interfere at all. And with my daughter, I only had 2 weeks, and if I didn't give birth in 2 weeks, she'd be induced. And I lived miles away. I was in California from a hospital at that point, and I was only allowed to go to a birthing center, which is all totally natural, and you can't have any medication when it's painful. But if you go past 2 weeks, you have to go to the hospital. And I was at night of the 2 weeks, and I thought, you've got to come. So I put my basil in the bath, and nothing happened. I was pacing. And then I rubbed basil on me, nothing happened. And my husband said, you're so tense, just put some jasmine on your wrists and relax. Nothing's going to happen with you being that tense. So I put some jasmine on my wrist, and I suppose with the basil and relaxing, I barely made it to the hospital. It was an hour away. She just arrived. I thought, oh God, I'm going to give birth in the car. Anyway, but in between, so that was my daughter. And then I was living in Hay-on-Wye, and it was the foot and mouth, I think. And the farmer couldn't get to see the sheep. And he said, look, will you look at, there's a sheep. Well, he could, but I think there was restrictions with traveling too much. And I was up on in the farmhouse there at that time. And he said, can you check on the sheep? Because this particular one, she's aborted, yet she has another inside. She's got another one that's died inside her. And I don't think, no, he didn't say, can you check on that? I think he said she's in a thing by herself because she'll probably die because she's aborted one that was dead, and she's got another one that's dead inside her, and she won't make it through the night. And I thought, no, I'm not going to ignore her. So I went with my kit of remedies, and I did actually have a neighbor there who came with me, and she sniffed, I'm going to try the basil, see if it works for her. And I did try a few other remedies, but she sniffed away at the basil, and then she stopped. So I took the basil away, and then she began contractions. And I thought, God, this is amazing. But nothing happened. Nothing came out. And then I let her rest a bit because she was quite exhausted. And then I tried her again, and she has little nostrils sniffing away. And then she began contractions again, and we managed to get this very dead, rotten, decayed lamb out of her. It was pretty awful, and it smelled awful. And so I called up the farm and I said, we managed to get her to abort the fetus. And he said, she's not going to live till tomorrow. She's probably going to die of blood poisoning. So I'm running down to the big shed where she was kept with my kit again. And this time she selected, I think it was lime. I think I'd offered her different oils for the liver, and she selected lime, and her little nostrils took it in, and she was fine. And the next day she was back with the herd. So, and then my daughter, she also was going to have to be induced. So I said, okay, let's see if it works for you. So that was quite recently, 2 years ago. And I massaged it on her back, but nothing happened. And I said, well, yeah, it worked for me when I put it in the bath. So she put it in the bath, and and she didn't have to be induced. So, and she had a very healthy baby, just like, all the others were very healthy. So that was all basil. So when I wrote about basil, I write about that story because it's particularly key to one oil. And then there's another story that I find really fascinating, because it's about angelica root. And I'm going to talk about it at the French conference because I've got to talk on trauma. And I worked with a baby elephant. I know there's a dog podcast. Does it matter that I go off piste?
All animals.
Yeah, it's all the same. What works for one species works for another. We just work with it differently. And so basically the elephant didn't take neroli straight away. And I thought, and he was reclusive because he was found suckling on his mother, who had died because her trunk had been severed in a trap, and she died of starvation. And he was rescued by the Sheldick Trust, but he just found it difficult. He was just by himself. He wasn't really blending with the keepers or the other elephants. He was a sad little chap. And so I went into the stable with him, and he only began working with the oils when I began with angelica root. And only after angelica root would he work with neroli. And when he worked with neroli, he then came up and he put I've got it all on video, he put his foot on my knee, on my lap. I took it off, and then he put it on again, and then off, and then on, and then sat in my lap. And just about. And at that point, Daphne took me in and said, oh, this is amazing. So then I go to some calves, which is really fascinating. So I go to some calves, and they've all been separated from mum because they're dairy calves at birth, and they're looking very poorly and very sad, and they're 1 year old. And so I go into the stable, into their area, and I put out buckets and different oils, 5 different oils, jasmine being one, neroli, angelica root, and all of them go to angelica root first, and then neroli, and they don't look at any other oils. And I thought, this is incredible that their selection is the same as my elephant, and how powerful that is of their level of suffering that they're experiencing from being taken away from mum. And then and then I went to the cows, the beef cattle, who were still with mum, and I did the same thing again and put out different buckets of water. None of them took the angelica or the neroli, but they all took jasmine. And these cows were pregnant with the next generation, and so they were just about to be they were just about to sort of go on to life by themselves, so to speak, and be independent of mum. And then as I'm writing about jasmine, I'm realizing it really sort of brought the oils. I spent a lot of time really sitting with the oils as well and bringing them into really into a very deep level. And I suddenly saw jasmine as, I'm writing about it as being sensual, because it is incredibly sensual. And then next minute it's for mother and bonding, and it helps with milk supply. and it's got chemicals in like indole, which helps with the bonding process. And whether it stimulates oxytocin as well, I don't know. But I've written all about this, and as I'm looking at that oil almost as a whole, I see that it's in almost a circle of life, so it brings together the reunion to create the offspring, and then it supports mother and her bonding with the child right up until that infant is ready to leave, and it helps them, leave without feeling rejected. Yet the individuals that have been rejected, be it human, be it animal, be it dog, they tend to select jasmine, and the ones that haven't had that mother's love, they tend to select jasmine. And so I found, I wanted to sort of really give myself that space, and the more I kept writing on the oils and rewriting, I found I was seeing pictures that were beginning to show a pattern. So with jasmine, so I always look at jasmine as not only being very sensual, but also everything to do with being bonding and rejection, or supporting, not being rejected, but also those who have had rejection are very often attracted to neroli. So it goes to very deep levels, my book, on the oils. Some is a little bit scientific, and some is very more working on the mind and emotions, and where I don't have anything to support it, there is no science. And where there is science to support what it's doing, then I write it down. And then I've got some incredible case studies in the back. I've got human case studies. I've got a case study where essential oils and homeopathy is being used together under a vet. Got amazing case studies on UTIs under vets as well, and vets and no vets, but a lot of vet supervision, really seeing how these oils are working. I've got some case studies actually from vets in there, so it's not just my work, and not just me saying how great the oils are. And I've got a case study where I worked with, I think I spoke about this last time, Pseudomonas, resistant to bacteria. So you've got all the pictures in there, so you can see how quickly the wound healed, and that was all under veterinary supervision. And in fact, the massive, great big wound.
Incredible.
And those are the vets I've just been working with now in Wales on Zoom. So, and the homeopathic case, where that was really fascinating, because the dog initially wanted just homeopathy, and then it wanted the oils, and then when it relapsed a bit, it wanted the homeopathy, and then it wanted the oils. I needed one case on homeopathy and oils, which is one that was submitted to me by a student who was working with her vet. I've got lots of cases with my own dog selecting both homeopathy and essential oils, and it's absolutely fascinating. I felt it was too overwhelming to write too much, because most people are, most of my experience is with essential oils and herbs, but the subject is really self-medication. I'm not an aromatherapist, I'm not a herbalist, I'm not a homeopath, but what I am is somebody who works with self-medication. So I'm reading the animal's expression to know how they want to work with various remedies, and they choose, and so they have the best healing for themselves. So my next book, which I've already begun, but it's going to be, it's very step-by-step. So this book isn't a step-by-step, because I've got because I've spoken about how the oils work medicinally, and I've really sort of gone quite delve deep. I'm talking about humans, so I've had to write it that this can be achieved. This is how dogs normally work with oils. This is how cats normally work. This is how people normally work. This is how dogs normally work, and opposed to a step-by-step guide. So the next book will have no case studies, no science, It'll be more picture book guide, so you can see bitter almond, and it'll be little coded, maybe a cancer ribbon, just so you can just look at it and see it's cancer, bacteria, and that way I think we get there legally. So legally I can I have much more freedom of speech putting it as a picture guide. So I haven't got, bitter almond, but X amount of drops in it. But I've said, horses typically may take X amount of drops in a bucket of water, and dogs typically take it this way, but occasionally. And that way it's an educational resource. So that's how it's written. And I didn't want to, I was worried that, somebody might buy it thinking, oh, they wanted a step-by-step guide, but it does, have a lot of information. But the other book is more how to offer the oils and which oils work together. But that might not be out to the end of the year. Suddenly is so busy, but it's that. So basically that's sort of, and wildlife. I wasn't pleased with the stories I did on wildlife before in my old book. In fact, I wasn't pleased with a lot of my stories because I felt I didn't draw the reader in. I didn't give them, I felt it was like a first edit. It needed much more refinement. I needed, more detail without being wasted words. So it was trying, put it this way, the vet on my course called Brett, he has my old book and he read through the case studies in this book and he said, Caroline, I love your case studies. I've been in tears all the way through. And he has my old book, but he didn't say it with my old book. So I've rewritten them, I've given them the time they deserved. And I think with my old book, I felt it hasn't been out, for a couple of years, and I felt under a lot of pressure that I need to get this book out because people wanted it out. And, I didn't have anything to replace it. And looking through, I thought, I wish that I had really given it that extra rewrite, walk away from it, come back, rewrite, and, get all my notes up for my stories and just keep rewriting them until, you're sort of weeding the garden of the words that aren't needed, but putting in the words that are to really understand the story.
And now that's what this new one is doing, because you've had the chance to reflect on the original and to then augment it to narrate differently, draw in some of that emotional thing. And so I think whether or not a reader is looking for that case study to have the emotional connection, to look at just the scale, the breadth of how self-selection can be applied. And as you say, not just oils, but clays and hydrosols and fresh herbs and homeopathy, everything from the natural world. It's a really broad palette. So people who are maybe new to the topic have a lot of scope to kind of explore where this is going. But then the people who are wanting a little bit more of the science, because we like that too, can dig in and really have that nourishment of like curiosity satisfied.
We like the rabbit hole. Going down the rabbit hole with all the references. We've got a question here from Heather. And Heather, this is a great question. And I've got one that kind of comes off the back of your question. So how do you know if a dog or a cat needs to have essential oils is Heather's question. And my question off the back of that is if you are just starting out and considering supporting your animals by offering them different oils or herbs or any kind of remedies, what would your minimum toolkit, if you like, include?
I think, it's quite a difficult question because it really depends, first of all, dog. Okay, so we're looking at a dog, maybe. They probably need a bit more than a cat in the toolkit. But I think it really depends what are you working with, because you've got oils and remedies that deal with pain. You've got ones that deal with the gut, the liver, the kidneys. And I saw a question along the bottom saying, how do you know if your dog or cat needs an essential oil? So first of all, you're looking at, is there a problem? If there's no problem, they probably don't need an essential oil. But if there is a problem, is it a behavioral problem? Is it a physical problem? Have they been diagnosed with something? And then you begin with that. So if they've been diagnosed with maybe having IBS, and then you would offer oils that support the gut, and you would offer oils that support the microbiome. So then what you do from that point, it depends again what breed, and this is where education comes in. Breeds with short noses very often work very, very closely to the oils. Shepherds and deerhounds and greyhounds and whippets and collies, they're often very sensitive to the oils, but they're also sensitive to veterinary medicine, and a little bit will go a long way. So so just watching the nose twitch or stillness, or if they smell an oil and then walk away and lay down, that's usually going to be a very key oil. You kind of know that's a positive oil. Whereas people will say, oh, he's walked away and laid down. Well, if you go and follow them and reoffer their oil, you'll find that they will be working with it. Sniffing isn't a key factor. The key factor is the stillness, because you're breathing it in. You're still breathing it in. They're getting a lot. Sniffing, you're giving an even bigger dose. Mouthing, you get a different dose, and putting the tongue out, you're getting the dose in the air. So it's knowing what breed you're working with and how far to begin offering the oil. So if they're a sensitive breed, or if they've got lots of olfactory receptors like hound dogs, you're going to begin a bit further away. And then you take the lid off, and you're working with an oil that matches, or you think matches, their condition. Don't just go randomly for oils, and don't sort of go across the board. If you're working with the stomach, stay with gut oils. Don't jump around, because you'll get very confused, and the oils kind of work in synergy to help that organ system, and you'll get lost. So you basically offer oils to support the gut microbiome, if that's the problem, and then they begin to get heavy eyes. You look at the breathing. The breathing is probably the most important thing to look at when you see zero facial expression, because they're so sort of, their eyes are open, but they're working with the oil. And a lot of people think, well, are they still working with it? And then you look at the breathing, and yes, they are. And then you begin to take the oil away, because you think, oh, maybe they're not. And then the eyes open and they follow you. So they don't bring the oil back, because they're still working with it. You're looking at those little nuances, and it is a very subtle language, but it's so powerful. My learning was with horses. Horses were easy. Dogs were really complex. And the reason dogs were so complex, not only because it's very, very subtle, but you get a long way with it, but also because of the breeds. So you've got so many different breeds, so many different enzymatic physiologies, so many different lengths of noses. And if anyone's going to want an oil by mouth, it's very often a terrier. It would be very unlikely to be a shepherd or a collie. You put your fingers together if they're desperate for it, like with that retriever at the beginning that I spoke about. I feel it's cruel to not let an animal have their medicine if they need it. And I'm very much into agency. I totally respect animals as our guiders. I don't feel I'm above them. I don't, I look at them as intelligent beings that don't need to be always wrapped up in, cotton wool, that we don't allow them to think for themselves. And, because I've seen it for 40 years, them healing themselves, of course, my trust is 100% there. And so I just let them guide me. And, if somebody took my medicine away, and I was that retriever. How heartbreaking. I'm almost there, almost about to have the acid from my gut going away. But you don't just put a blob on you if they want to mouth it. You don't just put a drop on your tongue, on your finger. It's going to be too strong. You have damp fingers, so they can just get that damp amount. And then if they want more, do the same again. Build it up. Just let them have as much as they want. And it's only
just on that point of agency that you mentioned, because I think that's a really critical point. And obviously that's what's underpinning the application of this science, right? We've got the evidence of it happening in behavioral ecology. Animals are doing this whether or not we sanction it, approve it, like it, or anything else. This is how they live their life in the wild. It's part of their lifestyle. But when we look at the application of it, how we can introduce that into the life that they live under our care, under our decision-making processes, when we accept or acknowledge that they have skills above and beyond ours, above and beyond what we know to give to them. And if we can give them that agency and open that door, the fruits of that are obviously astonishing. But one thing that you touched on, and then we kind of didn't latch there, was when do we know to offer these to our animals? When we're seeing a sign or a symptom or some kind of indication in their body or in their behavior that makes us wonder what's going on. Can I help? But what I find is interesting to do as well is, even if we don't see those signs, even if we can't see an external manifestation of something that's indicating, we can still use these oils, hydrosols, the full arsenal in self-selection for two things. One, for enrichment for the animal, to have the chance to experience and engage with elements of the natural environment that are meaningful to them, that they can have a curiosity and a learning experience, a familiarity thing, just a session of enrichment. But frequently when we do that, we see then that animals will select something that is unexpected from our point of view. Mm-hmm. And then it behooves us to then question, well, why are they so interested in, let's say, birch? Yeah. Are we seeing, does this animal actually have invisible pain that we as the human didn't observe, didn't clock? Right? But the animal's been living with for however long. And as soon as the medicine entered their world through an enrichment protocol, right, all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is exactly what I needed. Let me work with this. And so now we can be much more intelligent and not necessarily proactive, because the animal was being proactive, but faster reactive pet parents to an issue that the animals are experiencing that was completely off our radar. So from a welfare point of view, we can get the jump, we can get ahead of the curve and be much faster at responding to animal suffering or animal disease or animal health problems than someone who's not operating within this world of self-medication.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very much in the interest of animal welfare. And, with a dog, it might be the pain is in between the shoulder blades. A lot of dogs have pain in between shoulder blades, TMJ, neck area. And if you peppermint, for example, on your fingertips, and they push into it, and when they know you're working with them, they show you every part where they need the pain. Then they turn around and they put their, maybe their right hind leg to where your hand is with the peppermint. So you push in there, and it seems to work just putting the peppermint on your hand and rubbing in. I'd never put it in a vegetable oil. If you're going to put it in anything for larger amounts, or if it's something that you're going to do more frequently, I put in aloe vera gel, because with the aloe vera gel, it can get larger areas, so it will go further and it goes through the hair follicles into the dermal layers and gets to where it's needed. And that's and it works really well for partial paralysis and things like that. So, and I put it in a gel. But yes, there's so many techniques. And another, the vet said to me, he was actually looking at, he's been sort of going through monitoring my book, and he said, Very important question. He said, so Caroline, you talk about all of this and animals, selecting plants to bring themselves back into health, but you haven't said why you're using essential oils and not the plants. And I thought, very good question. So, when you nerd in your
so
head,
obvious that you forgot it.
there were so many reasons why I use essential oils. But, one of the many reasons is if the animal is really sick, they're not going to want to eat anything because they don't. And just by inhaling, so it's like a gas. So it's, they're getting those chemicals in. We know from anesthetic, just breathing in a gas can be very effective. And they're healing themselves just by breathing. So they don't have to put their body through digesting plant material. That is one of the many reasons too. I can work, just maybe with animals. If I'm working with wild or exotic animals, it's much easier to work just seeing what their response is to different aromas, seeing them stop, seeing them come back, and then opposed to putting lots of plants out, I can just get there by offering different remedies. Then I know which one, and then I put those out, like with the seal, and then I put it in the water. But otherwise, you'd be using a lot of plant material to really find out what's needed. So I ended up writing a bit of a chapter on that too. So
exciting. And I can't believe that we are already running out of time. It just goes so quickly. Heather's just asked there, do you find particular oils that animals favour more than detest? And I think that the animals choosing what they favour depending on what their body needs at that time.
Well, our most popular oils, time and time again, are garlic by all animals, not people. Most people hate garlic. It's kept at the end of the shed in lots of packaging. Primates don't really go for garlic either, which is quite interesting. But cats, love it, and dogs love it, and horses love it. But that is a really, really popular all-round antimicrobial. It really supports the gut. And birch for pain, those oils, and German chamomile, horses, big time German chamomile. But those are some of the most popular oils. But, garlic is super irritating if it was to touch your skin or the animal's skin. So be very careful on that. It's also, it's got over 200 papers on its effects against cancer. It's a very powerful anticarcinogenic oil, as well as supporting the immune system and T helper cells. It's like a really broad spectrum natural antibiotic, and it really supports overpopulations in the gut. I mean, some animals might need more something like lemongrass, which is more antifungal. If they've got yeasty skin, then they might go for something like lemongrass. Or if it's more E. coli, they're very likely that's overpopulating in the gut, opposed to an E. coli infection that's been, that they've caught. But both ways, it's bitter almond, and there's been a lot of research on its effects against that particular bacteria. But they also support T helper cells, natural killer cells. Bitter almond has been in the Journal of Oncology because, benzaldehyde, and bitter almond is 98% benzaldehyde, because it's so, I think it cured 6 cases of cancer out of 121 patients, and that wasn't self-selection. And that's pretty impressive considering, spontaneous remission is, out of so many 100,000. And then I had a friend of mine who's got stage 4 cancer, and he came over and he absolutely loved garlic. So one of the few people, men particularly don't like garlic, but he did. And so I got him to put in some vegetable oil, and he just couldn't get enough. Put it on his tongue. He said, it's like salt, sweet, it's salty. Oh my God, this is delicious. took it back with him. Everybody was keeping their distance from him. Last thing I heard, he was skiing earlier on this year. He's still going strong. And then he went off to Thailand. I must give a call, but he said, I feel amazing with this garlic. I mean, he is on, not chemo, it's another type of immunotherapy, but, he still wasn't meant to keep on going. But he said, since the garlic, he feels so full of life. And the doctor said, hey, whatever you're doing, keep on going because you're looking great. So he's, and that's liver cancer that he has. So, it's, these are really powerful medicines. And I think and I think being put into the beauty world has, in a way, been a disservice because a lot of people think they're beauty products. But then if you work with the medicinal ones like garlic or birch, everybody's afraid of them because in the aromatherapy world, they're meant to be using it not as a cure, but just as a massage or to stimulate the lymph. And these aren't used as massage. They're used specifically on specific problems. So, if there's an infection, you're just going to be working on that infection. If there's joint pain, you're just going to be working on the joint pain. You're not going to be working on healthy areas. So we don't use the oils on healthy areas, whereas I think in aromatherapy, the oils are used on healthy skin and healthy areas of the body. And so they have everything diluted. And, it's, but I think it's time for the truth to get out, how powerful these medicines are and what can be achieved because, it's amazing what can be achieved with them. And they are medicinal. There's no two ways about it.
Two last questions. One is from Andrea saying, has there been an oil chosen that surprised you? And the second is, where can people find out more about your book?
Okay, so, oh gosh, I'm sure there's been lots of cases with an oil that surprised me. When I picked up the wrong oil by accident, but nothing's by accident. I thought you'd never, didn't think you'd need that. And then I've learned a bit more about the oil and then re-offered that oil for other conditions that are similar. So a lot of my work is what was
that one? Out of curiosity, I think I've heard you tell this story before, but
I can't remember.
You can't remember. Neither can I.
But the book is typically written from experience. So time and time again, what animals select with different problems. The book, I've got a website, www.ingrahambooks.com. There is £10 off until it comes into print. It comes into print on the 22nd. If you wanted to see videos on this, I think I've got a pretty good deal out there on my other website, whereby they're half price. And there's a lot of lessons. I've got 16 lessons in each module. And I actually saw one of my students in France, selling 3 lessons for £1,500. And I sell 16 lessons, and some of them are long. Some, I've got horse, dog, cat in there. I've got a horse video, which is 1 hour long. And it's 200 and something pounds for the 16 lessons. So, and I cut the price in half because I just wanted people to know about the subject really. And that's in 2 halves, is module 1, module 2. And that really...
Do you mind just that website link again? Sorry, Caroline.
That one is carolineingraham.com. And that's got my courses on. And there's little...
What's the name of that people should look for?
Oh, it's just module 1 and module 2.
And module 2, okay.
And I have a little clip. Yeah, I've got a little clip of each lesson. So you kind of can know what you're buying. And on my book, I've actually, if you go to my Instagram, which is Caroline_Ingraham, you'll see that I've copied some pages if you swipe to the right. And so it's just kind of so people know what they're buying, really. And same with the course, just so people know what they're buying. I try and give people a taster of it, because it's awful if you buy something and you don't know what you're buying. It's quite nice to know what's inside the book. And I will, people who are subscribed, I must put something up on my mailing list to everybody, and I will put the contents of the book so people can see exactly what is in the book. So
fantastic. Well, thank you so much for spending the evening with us. I think we could quite cheerfully carry on for days, but we will let you go for the moment. Hopefully we will see you again very soon back on the podcast. And I put all the links. If you're watching this live, you'll be able to see the links now in the comments. If you're watching on playback, let us know in the comments. If you've got any questions, Caroline's Instagram and website links are there, so you can comment. You can message her directly as well. I can't wait to read the next book.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me talk about it. So thanks for coming on. And thanks for inviting me on and letting me talk about my book. So that's great. And it's lovely to spend the evening with you both too.
We're very grateful.
It's always so joyful, I think, for everyone, us as well, but everyone to hear just how much we can do partnering with our animals in very simple ways to improve their quality of life. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to understand and recognize the sentient, beautiful animals in front of us that have intelligence, that have a life worth living, and look to us to contribute to that in a positive way. And the more that we know, the more that we can give that to them. And then the circle of life just gets bigger and better, doesn't it? So
I think it is about partnering with your animal. Yeah, and it's just such a relief to them that somebody's listening, because usually they're held onto and something's slapped on them and they have no choice. Right. And so what's the point? But you have no voice. Somebody's going to put this on you topically or whatever they're going to do. You might not want it. They're going to put it in your food. You're starving. You've got to eat it because they put something in your food. And or maybe supplements that really don't suit you. And when you give them that agency, that respect, and you offer them an oil and you realize, when they don't want it, you take it away, or you put the lid on straight away when you don't think they want it. And then they indicate they do want a bit more, then you take the lid off, and then they think, oh, wow, she's working with me. And, and nothing is done that we haven't been given the consent of the animal for. And they get it. And then they begin to really communicate. Animals will sit by the cupboard that's got the birch in when they're feeling a little bit stiff and wait until the birch is being offered to them. And to have that bond, people who've got an amazing bond already, they just sort of even get stronger because we're treating them as an equal, not as if they're a child as such. Yes, we have to take care of them in a human world, but they're not, they're equals and they know what they need just as we do.
What a brilliant
wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note.
Well, thank you so much to everyone who's been watching live as well for joining in on the chat. Yeah. And we will see you all on the next episode.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Okay. All right.
Thank you for listening to the Dog Expert Podcast, the podcast dogs would want you to listen to. If you've enjoyed this episode, do come and let us know in our free Facebook group for dog lovers everywhere, Ethical Dog Training with Canine Principles. That way we can make more content like this that you'll love. We would love for you to leave a review on here and hit subscribe so that you never miss an episode.